Welcome to Classical Chats. I'm Tiffany. Today I'm very excited. I am reuniting with Arnaud Sussmann, the wonderful violinist. We played together 2 months ago, although by the time you're watching or listening to this episode, it might be 3 months already or more. We played Schumann quartets, and it was a lot of fun getting to know him musically. But today I'm going to get to talk to him about his journey with the violin, how he started, and how he practices, how he approaches a new piece for performance, and also some of his favorite recordings. Also, a lot more things that I currently don't remember, but it was a lot of fun to talk to him. So I hope you enjoy this episode.
Hi.
Nice to see you again.
And you, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Some of my audience actually look up to you. And
Well, I don't know
I
why,
looked
but
at the emails that they were so inspired by your concerts and were so excited. They were like, oh, Arno's going to come on Classical Chat. So happy to have you.
well, that's nice, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you and to talking to your audience. Although I'm not directly talking to them, but I guess they'll hear from me a little bit.
We live in this weird space where we're talking to people without talking or seeing anyone.
Yes, well, I'll speak with you, and then they can
Yes,
listen to our conversation.
yes. Well, I'm excited to see how you're doing since for those who don't know, we played together. When was that? 2 months ago now? Is it really 2 months ago? Oh my.
Wow. Well, I have no concept of time, to be honest with you. So this whole year feels like it never happened in a way, but at the same time felt very long. And so the same thing for the
Whole year,
last two
like
months.
2020 or 2021? Because we're like almost halfway in this
You
so-called
see,
new year.
yeah, I was thinking more like 2020, but you're right. It's been already, almost six
Yeah.
months of 2021. But yeah, by year, I meant sort of like the pandemic year.
Yeah. But it's nice to see that you've been traveling a little bit more now, right?
Yes, it's. I feel very fortunate that I am vaccinated, and there some places in the U.S. I know it's not everywhere in the world, and I think you have audience from all over the world. But luckily, here in the U.S., the numbers are getting better, and concert presenters are starting to open up. Although mostly very safely with social distancing and still playing with masks and all of that stuff. But so I've been lucky to be able to travel to a few places. I'm traveling again this weekend. Looking forward to that. So it's
Ah.
nice. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad I caught you to have a little bit of time to do this.
Yes, me too.
Okay, cool. So let's start from the very beginning. You probably know this from Matt's episode, but I ask every single guest this question, which is how did their journey with classical music begin?
Okay. Well, there are no musicians in my family. Both my parents are doctors, and but my dad particularly loved classical music as a young man, and my parents thought it would be good for me and my sisters to learn an instrument for our education,
Hmm.
and so we all did. We went to the conservatory in Nice, in the south of France, where I grew up,
Hmm.
and it turns out that I was quite talented for it and had an affinity for it. I actually started with piano, and at
Me
five,
too. Oh,
and
happy to
then
learn.
did violin at 7. Started violin at 7. I did both for a little while, and then I felt, I think, a stronger connection with the violin, so I switched.
Why?
Uh, I switched over to the violin exclusively a few years after that, but I was doing both for a little while, and I think it was good actually in a way to start with piano for sort of the basics. I think it's at the very beginning. Tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it's easier to start with piano than violin because
Well, it's less likely to sound like you're killing a chicken.
exactly, exactly, and yeah, and so in Nice, and I don't know how it is in America or in the rest of the world, but we have there are schools where you can focus on music in the afternoon, for example, and your schoolwork in the morning,
Huh.
which is what I did for the entirety of my school years. And so I graduated from the conservatory in Nice. I think I was pretty young, maybe 14, something like that. And then I started traveling for music. I went to Lyon for a year. I went to Paris for a year. I had a wonderful Russian teacher in both of those places. And then I came to the US in 2001, so 20 years ago, for to go study at the Juilliard School. And so this is sort of a
Oh.
condensed version of what's happened to me.
So you came to Juilliard. I mean, a lot of people look to Europe to study classical music, but you came to the US.
Yeah, I don't. A lot of people look to Europe. A lot of people look to the U.S. as well.
Not to put down Juilliard or anything. I mean, I did kind of study there, kind of, although it's always like a big question. What did she exactly study?
That's funny.
Because
Well,
like I wasn't there full time like you were, but I was
yes.
there for 12 years, so it feels like full time. Like I was
Wow.
there for pre college for 8 years, and then I
Yes.
did the exchange program with Columbia for 4 years. So it's like 12
Wow,
years,
that's a lot of time
a
to
lot of time.
spend in that school. But I'll tell you what, I think, of course, the school is very important, but what I think is more important is really your teacher, right?
Mm.
And so that's why I moved to the US. I had the
Mm.
opportunity to come study with my teacher here, something I couldn't, pass. And I'm very happy that I did because then I I love New York City. And I never left. Right, I've been here for last 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, and you're doing really well. I mean, you're in the elite with the Chamber Music Society. So
I'm
that's
lucky to be a part of that organization for sure.
yeah. Few things stand out to me when people say, "Should we pursue?" I mean, people as in like the stereotype that you should be a doctor, should be a lawyer. Musicians, that's a not so good of a profession. But you came exactly the opposite, where you went from a medical background into music. Did you ever consider um, doing medical stuff for your profession? But
No, and I was lucky to have very supportive parents who didn't want me to become a doctor like them. Um, but and so they were, they just were going to support us in whatever endeavor we wanted to do.
mm,
And the other thing that I often say is that I was incredibly fortunate that because I had this affinity with violin and music, I never had to choose what I wanted to do. And I know for a lot of people, it's a very difficult decision to make at some point.
yeah,
You have to decide, well, what am I going to do? I don't know if it's in college, before, or after. Luckily for me, I never had to decide. It was such a gradual progression. As I said, I was doing music in the afternoons. I was talented. I graduated from conservatory. I went to the next teacher, and so on and so forth. And so I feel very fortunate about that. I know, for example, my younger sister, who is so brilliant. She's incredibly smart, and so was years ahead in terms of her regular schooling. And it became very difficult at a certain point to decide where she was going to go because she did have so many opportunities, which is great, but sometimes too many options can also be very difficult.
yeah.
So for me, I feel fortunate that I never quite had to sit down and decide, hey, what am I going to do? I just played violin, and it I loved it, and I still love it, and so I'm fortunate that I'm able to make a living from it, and I never quite had to decide, hey, that's what I need to do.
That's good. In a way, I guess maybe it's also kind of how I am with my journey so far. Although I don't know, maybe I'll switch career if I fail somewhere in
I
between.
think about that sometimes too. No, but I think it's true for most people that have, that talent, and were able to find that passion or that thing from a young age, right? So it could be with music, could be with sports, arts, anything else, right? Where somebody's worked on that skill and that thing from such a young age, and so you just keep going with your life because it seems like it's your calling, right?
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I knew that I had a talent. Did you know that? Like, was it something that you were
No,
conscious?
well, you don't think about that when you're young, I don't think, right? You're just told by your teachers, and if you have supportive parents and teachers and the right people around you that are going to push you that way, right? So
Yeah.
I'm only reflecting back, knowing that yes, I had, you too, obviously, right? You had that talent, so which brought us to New York and to study at Juilliard, a
I
great
was so
school, and
clueless, though. I mean, still I am around this age. I'm still a bit clueless about many things, but definitely back then, I remember auditioning for Juilliard. I was like scratching my head. I didn't know what Juilliard was. I was 7 or 8, 7. So
wow,
like,
yeah, that is a young age.
remember? Wait, you were there when the stairs were there, right, with the fountains?
Of course, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, I
I was
remember
there
walking
before.
up those stairs, being very like kind of nervous, but not exactly knowing why. I'm so itchy everywhere.
Wow, well,
Like,
I'm amazed you remember that. I don't know if I remember all that much when I was 7 years old, and it's maybe
for
sad
some
to say,
reason,
but
that moment stands out to me. I just remember, well, I mean, it was my first time in New York, so in a foreign city that I didn't really speak English, did not know how to answer some of the questions in the exam, the English placement interview. But yeah, long time ago. But I have to ask though, as since the piano is here and we are a little bit offended, but not really. I'm just joking. But what drew you to the violin aside, away from the piano? Do you remember if there were certain moments or pieces or music?
No, I don't remember the specific details, but I just think that I just had a closer connection with it, and my teachers recognized that, and I did too, right? I honestly I don't remember that time really when I was 5, 6, or 7 when I started playing the violin, but I just know that it was clear that this was something more for me. Uh, and understood the instrument better. But I love the piano. I wish I still played the piano. I think I was somewhat talented at the piano as well. But nowadays, well, okay, I'll tell you what. Because of intonation, if I had to do it all over again, I think I would I would play the piano. But at the same time, you guys have so many notes, so I don't know if I would want to do that. Also, you always have to play on a different instrument. I often like to think if I had to do it this over again, which instrument I would choose. And
Really? You think about that, huh?
I do, because the this intonation business really, I think you'll ask a lot of string players. It's so much time spent on trying to play in tune, and I wish I could think about other things, but we have to. You just have to think about that because that's a
Yeah.
obviously we think about I think about the music and all. That's not the only thing I think about, but I wish. Like a pianist, I wouldn't have to worry about that specific thing. But of course, as a pianist, you have to play so many notes. I wouldn't want to do that either.
Is it though? But it's just one thing we have to take care of. With violin, you have this part that's doing something entirely different from this arm, you
Wow,
know?
good posture you have right
Uh,
there.
funny. Yeah, but it's like, you have to sync up doing two different kinds of things and controlling differently. Whereas the piano,
Oh well, yeah, but you have 10 fingers. I don't know. We can debate back and forth, but
I've never had this conversation, by the way. So that
really, that's
yeah,
interesting.
I've never had this kind of debate going back, which is more complicated.
Yes. Well, I don't know. Both have their difficulties, of course.
But I do remember you were very keen on the accurate intonation in rehearsals. I remember you were the one getting everyone to get into
Yeah,
it.
I mean that's a very important part of it. But I want to make sure your audience knows that it's more important, of course, to focus on. I don't know if it's more important, but it's the biggest part of music is really the music and the emotion behind it and all that stuff. But um, you have to think about all the other, let's say, technical aspects around it because you want to be completely free from that, or you don't want the audience to focus on that, right?
Exactly.
So that's a big part of it because I don't enjoy when I'm sitting in a concert hall and it's out of tune and it's not together and all this stuff. You unfortunately often you notice that ahead of the music making if it's really distracting, right?
Hmm.
So in a way you want to take care of all your technical things so that you can then allow people to really only focus on the most important thing, which is the music.
What is your practice day like?
Yeah, well, that's changed a lot, especially in the last year because we had a baby. That's taking a lot of time out of me and my wife, so it's very different than it used to be. But I do like to spend time on technique. So whether it's scales, I'm not gonna lie, I don't do scales every day. I do scales not every day, but I do I do have a couple etude books that I love to go through. I often talk about having a certain type of fluency in your playing, so that you don't have to sit down and work for hours on a specific problem to try and get it, but that things come more and more naturally. And that thing that comes with a lot of experience and a lot of practice and all this stuff. But so I like to open these etude books and just go one after the next and sort of, over the years, I think I've built sort of the right habits and posture and all this stuff where things sometimes they flow easily, sometimes not so easily, but I try to do that. So I definitely touch on that. And then I'm sure you feel the same, but I'm always trying to catch up with learning repertoire and either relearning a piece. Often it's the case for me because especially in chamber music, I've played a lot of the main repertoire, but I have a lot of new pieces, for example, for this summer that I have to learn. I hate learning things late at the last minute, so I always start way ahead of time to give myself the time to really internalize whatever piece I have to learn. So yeah, that's my, mostly it's just learning, relearning the notes or learning the notes through the few hours here that I can do during the day.
Mm. Few follow-up questions. Which etude books for those who may be
Yeah.
right.
Mostly two. It's called Jacob Don't, Dont.
Oh,
And the other one is Pierre Rode, Rode. Those are two great books. And one, but I do it less, but it's also a great book, the Kreutzer Etudes. Yeah, those are the books.
interesting. Huh, I mean, yes, your story makes sense in that the basics shows that basics are really important, but now I'm starting to question my my
What do you do?
I just practice the pieces. I and then whatever obstacles I get from the experience of learning these pieces, and sometimes like with list etudes, once you've played a very long and complicated I played one of his transcriptions that was quite complicated. I learned so much through that experience when I was 14 that I remember those elements and can apply easily to other pieces. So
Hmm.
for me, it's just learning by experience. It was never something that I did on the side to train my technique, which it might be why I miss a lot more notes. But I don't know. It's just it was never part of my
Hey,
education.
whatever works for different people, but also because I teach, and so I refer a lot to these etude books.
Yeah.
So it's always a reminder when I give it to the students that it would not be a bad idea that I do this myself. And I one thing that I really like to do, this is what my teacher back in France used to do, is to connect the problem or whatever you're working on in an etude with how you're going to apply it to real piece of music,
Yeah.
because sometimes people, there's too much of a divide, right? You practice your etudes, you don't think about the main pieces, and so you hate practicing the etudes. And no, I really like to point out the exact connection. So in the Don't book, which I did a lot, Don't etude number one, which is all about chords, that's going to help you prepare for Bach. Same with Don't 8 number 4. Don't 8 number 8, all thirds. It's really for hand frame and strength. Maybe that's a little bit less about specific pieces, although you need the hand frame and strength for everything that you play. Don't, and I can go on and on with all of the etudes. Don't etude number 2 for bariolage and string crossing, etc., etc. So you just sort of make sure you connect the work that you do in etude so that it's not useless in your mind, that you will apply it when the time is right.
I like that approach. It's much more motivating, I'm sure, than
Yeah,
just
exactly.
tackle the boring etude things.
Yeah,
Ah,
absolutely.
I like that. Um, what was it like for you to become a teacher? I don't know at what point you started teaching, actually.
Well, I was a teaching assistant at Juilliard I want to say my last 2 years, maybe. So when I was doing my master's,
Mm.
um, and I think what is it? 6 years ago, I started teaching at Stony Brook University, which is really my first main teaching job. So, what was the question? What is it like?
Yeah, what's it like? Because you have the experience of obviously being a performing artist. What was that like to be a teacher, going from that?
Amazing. I'm sure anybody that teaches will tell you how much you can get yourself through the teaching, right? Because you have to start looking at music and what you do from a different perspective, right? Your whole life, you're standing in front of somebody when you're a young musician, and you're waiting for them to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
But when you start teaching, you switch things around, and then you sort of have to look at everything from a different lens, different perspective, which is really wonderful, because then obviously you're helping the students, but it's also helping yourself, because you have to distill certain concepts. You have to make sure you have your own philosophy that you've gathered from your various teachers and various influences. And so this is something you build over time, right? Because it's the same as performing. Teaching, you need the experience to know what works, what doesn't. And so yeah, it's been amazing. It's been so rewarding. I think everybody should teach at some point. Actually, I should also mention that I remember when playing for Mr. Perlman, and of course I hated it, but now I see why it was smart of him to do it this way. But every time, after every lesson, every time we'd play through whatever movement of a concerto or anything that we played for him at the beginning of the lesson, and the first thing that he would say is, "What did you think?" And I hated it because, after a while, he's going to ask that, and you just want him to offer his advice, which he always did. But why did he do that? Because he wanted to make sure that we would already listen with a critical ear to our own playing with it, because it's very easy when you play in the lesson to turn off your ears. Just you've practiced all your muscle memory and all this stuff, and so just expect the other person to really listen and then tell you what to do. But in the lessons with Mr. Perlman, you really had to be very aware of what you were doing and figure out what it is that could be done better. So I do apply, not every lesson, but I do apply this sort of method at the beginning of the lesson or whenever a student has finished playing, because I think it really is very valuable.
Mm. Well, thank you for that, because even when I decide to give lessons, I will definitely take that into consideration as a method, because
You
I don't
should give
actually
lessons. You have so much to share, and you'll see that it'll
why
be.
did you say that though? I mean, you're the part of the real circle of classical musicians, and I'm just like
Tiffany,
knocking at
stop
the
it.
door outside, like, hello.
Not at all. Not at all. You have years and years of experience, and it's never too
Yes, I
early to
am
start
old.
teaching. You're so old.
Well, for this charity, actually, I've decided that I will take the plunge and to incentivize a fundraiser for this grants that we're trying to give out to people who might need support to take lessons or pay for the instruments, that I will give away a lesson per 10% of the goal. So yes, I'm like inching my way, but this I would only do this for this purpose. Like, I don't feel comfortable teaching. Maybe it's a self-confidence issue.
That and experience, of course. If you haven't done it, it's scary the first time, right? But
Like,
you
I've
ever?
taught like little kids, like, this is a C.
Oh well, listen. There, I don't think I would really know what to do with young kids. That's a whole other ballpark, right? That's a whole other
Really?
thing. So
Wow.
I've luckily
Started
been.
professional for professionals only.
Well, or people that are more
My fellow
advanced.
students.
Yes.
Huh.
But young kids is a whole other thing, right? Because you have to know a little bit about child psychology and how to keep them interested and have very specific methods for kids. And so I would be very nervous also doing that. I don't know if I really could do it. I mean, there are people that really do it amazing, and so sometimes I am asked if I can teach a really young person, and I usually refer to somebody else, because it's a
Mhm.
huge responsibility, right? You're forming somebody from such a young age, and I just don't feel like I'm able to
Interesting.
do that. So yeah, I think it's much easier, and you'll notice in the future, maybe you can think back years from now, when you give master classes,
Oh
that
my
I
gosh.
mean,
Someone
this is
asked
this
me
what.
a presenter asked me if I would give masterclass, and I just, that title itself gives me
Yeah,
very
the
awkward.
title is silly, but you're listening to people that are looking up to you, and giving them some feedback. So think of another title if you want, um but you'll notice in masterclass that, at least for me anyways, the better the student is, and the more fun the teaching or the lesson or the whatever you want to call it is, because you
Well,
can
yeah.
delve into more interesting concepts and things. And so
I could
um
see that. I mean,
yeah,
I've watched master classes at Juilliard, and there are times when some people are just not understanding what the guest is trying to get them to play, and it just, I
exactly.
the frustration on their faces sometimes. So I could I can understand. Well, maybe one day. But speaking of teaching now, maybe you can introduce some pieces that maybe people don't know, or who don't usually listen to violin classical music or classical music in general. Maybe you can give some insights.
Yes, so you had asked me to find three pieces,
Could
so, and
be
it's not.
more. Three was just an option, so it's not too
Yes.
overwhelming, not
Okay.
too much homework.
Well, okay. So the first one is not a violin only piece, but it's one of my favorite pieces of music. And for those of you who maybe are don't listen to classical music all that much or don't know so much about it, or people that know a lot about it. I'm a huge fan of Rachmaninoff's music, and
Really?
one of my favorite pieces is his Second Symphony.
Uh,
I could listen to it in a loop and like full volume all day long, pretty much. And I love it so much that we used part of the second movement for our wedding when my wife walked in down the aisle, because I think it's just the most glorious music. Do you know his Second Symphony?
I will know once I listen to it, but I thought you were gonna send me the playlist before this chat, so
Oh,
I
I'm sorry I didn't. But honestly,
no.
with to be honest, on I have Apple Music. I have not found yet a recording of the piece that I really really love. I love the piece itself, and I love it so much that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But because I've listened to it a lot, there are beautiful clarinet solos in the second movement, etc. And so I. I'm still looking for an ultimate recording. So maybe when this comes out on YouTube, and if people are familiar with this piece and know of great recordings, they can put in the comments.
Yeah, for sure.
I would love to hear what
Yeah.
other people, if people know this piece. So that would be one.
So
Then
you never played it, right? I mean, you
actually, I
never
did
played
when I was at Juilliard. I did I play? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of course, that's how I was introduced to it.
it.
Playing in the orchestra at Juilliard and absolutely loving the piece. And it's so silly, but usually in the summer, I this is the only time when I'm driving a car, because I'm at various festivals and they rent a car and I drive from place to place. And so sometimes, I'll be playing the piece, and sometimes you like at a red light and there are people blasting all kinds of on other genres next to you, and I'll
Heavy
make a
voice.
point to turn like the most glorious romantic part of this piece,
My.
like
I
bring down my windows and put it on blast so that I can promote classical music the same way
love
people.
that.
But this piece really is, I don't know, it's I if there's any piece that people can listen for a few seconds to classical music through a open car window and fall in love with it, I think for me it would be this piece. It's just so romantic and gorgeous.
I will definitely
um,
take a listen. I mean, I wish that I was in the car driving past yours, because always when that happens, it's always something a bit sometimes offensive, like full of. But
yes,
yeah, it's like
I agree. So we have to fight that by blasting our own
I've
classical
not
music.
heard a single classical music blasting outside.
Well, I might be the only one, but I do it every so often if
I
I'm
did.
driving a car.
Wow! I did. That's funny. I did once. I did go on a lift, and they were playing WQXR, and I was so impressed.
Oh yeah, once in a while I'll be in a cab in the city. I love it. I always tell them, "Oh, thanks for playing that station," because otherwise, usually I ask them to just shut off the music. That's when it's like 5 a.m. on my way to the airport. I don't want to hear. Well, I respect all genres, by the way, I should say. So it's not
Yeah.
like I'm poo pooing other genres, but uh, I, of course, have an affinity specifically for classical music. But I listen to other things. Now, a couple of violin related pieces, and it's one of them is I listened to a lot as a kid, and I hadn't listened to it in many years until recently, and fell in love again with it. Is Nathan Milstein's recording of the solo Bach sonatas and partitas. I
Mm,
don't know if you know that recording,
I
but
have listened to it before.
it's a classic, and it's very old school violin playing with Bach, which maybe nowadays is more controversial because there
What does
are.
that mean?
What does that mean? Well, with Baroque music and with Bach in particular, Milstein plays in a very sort of romantic kind of way,
Mm,
romantic ideals, lots of vibrato, sometimes slides. And, in recent years, maybe in the last 30, 40 years, there have been definitely movements, um, authentic performance, I think they're called, where people are trying to look back and through books and other things, try to replicate maybe more the way it might have been played back then, with
mm,
gut strings and baroque setups and all this stuff. And so it's always kind of a controversial topic when it comes to how to play Bach. At the end of the day, you should just play the way it speaks to you. And anyways, I find this recording so convincing. Whether you love the actual style that he chose to play with, it's it's so convincing, it's so full of conviction. He is so full of conviction when he plays, and then it convinces me. I mean, you'll see again when you teach, you always ask this of the student, like, you have to be convince yourself, you have to believe 100% in what you're doing in order to convince the audience, right?
That changed my playing a lot when I was studying with actually in college when I was studying with I don't know, Kalkstein, do you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I was studying with him and also Maniacs, and both of them were very keen on trying to get me to really be in the driver's seat. Actually, Kalkstein was encouraging me because a lot of times as I said, I went through life very cluelessly, and that means that I just did things by intuition without really thinking so much. And I would hear myself playing. I mean, now I do. Back then, I didn't. That I would only commit to an idea for maybe 70% and then
Mm.
stop. Like if I was doing a crescendo, I would just like stop at mezzo forte and then I back away.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, conviction is so important and it changed my playing a lot.
It takes a long time. At least for me, it's taken a long time. I'm sure it'll take many more years, and but because you need a lot of experience, you need a lot of confidence, you need to learn exactly what are the ideals that you strive for, right? And when you're a young musician and you're getting ideas left and right from various teachers and colleagues and all this stuff, you absorb all of that stuff, hopefully, but it's other people's ideas, right? Eventually, you have to make them your own. So it does take a long time to, I think, really have full conviction
And
about.
to believe in your ideas and know that it's
Yes, and not be worried about what other people are thinking and all this stuff. So yeah, I relate to what you're saying. Still to this day, I mean, it's
really
ever lasting. Yeah, it's, I think that's really, in a way, the beautiful thing about what we do. It's never over. The surge and the progress is never over, and that's what makes. I think that's what keeps us going day after day, right? Because if you feel like, oh, I have the ultimate version of whatever piece and this is how I play it, no, you don't want that to happen, right? You always have to wonder how you can do this better. And I play a lot of chamber music, so that's an amazing art form in itself, because you get a lot of inspiration from playing with your colleagues. Like when we played together, right? You had some ideas, I had some ideas, and our other colleagues did. And
you had really good ones. I only said this after. I don't know if you knew during rehearsals, but I've never played the piece before. And
right,
so
no, that I was amazed. I mean, you were so quick picking it up.
I was obsessed with this piece. That's how that concert happened. It was me being obsessed. I've been in a Schumann phase, so I've been
Yes, I've seen that,
listening to
yeah.
everything, and I was so touched by the third movement, and I tweeted it about it, and Jan saw the tweet, and then was like, "Want to play a concert?"
Wow, I don't know if I knew the full story of that, but
That's
that's
how that
awesome.
happened. Actually, it
Yeah.
was because I was so inspired by the music. Anyway, I don't know a lot of things. That was the conclusion. um, I had a thought, and then I completely lost it. It
Well,
was to
talking about
follow up on
Schumann.
something you said. Anyway,
Well, no, I was just going to say, talking about Schumann, that now I'm starting to learn his first string quartet. I don't know if you know Opus 41, I think it is.
I've heard everything. I just have to. I don't know them.
Yeah, actually, I didn't know it. I don't know if they're often played, but or maybe I knew one of the movements that's a bit more well known. But anyways, I'm just bought the music. I'm starting the process of learning it for a summer festival, so I'm really excited about that. It's a wonderful piece.
What's that like? Hey, that's actually great for me to ask. How do you start a piece? I mean, we talked about kind of like how you practice a day. You have a lot of technical aspect, but how do you start a piece?
Yeah, it varies.
Well, with this Schumann, now I'm
Yeah,
very
okay. With
interested.
this Schumann, I have not yet put on a recording. I've just downloaded the score on IMSLP, and I've bought the Henley parts, so they are in the mail. But I think, as I always tell my students, you should always start from the score. Sort of look at the piece as a whole with all the parts, whether it's chamber, any piece of music. I mean, if you play solo, obviously you see the entire score right away, but otherwise, it's too easy to only focus on your parts. So right now, I'm sort of in the process of sight reading the movements with a score, like on my iPad or computer. I'm just sort of scrolling page by page and sort of getting a general outlook on how it goes. And once I'll get my part, then I'll start, delving more into the specifics of getting good fingerings and bowings that will help me serve the music well.
Hmm.
And then maybe at that point to listen to recording to sort of see how it sounds, generally speaking. And so I have a few weeks now to get that process going, to prepare for a festival in Seattle.
Ah, that's interesting. You also do you analyze the score?
I don't do like a serious, like, Roman numeral analysis, but uh, but I do. Well, I don't even do necessarily a formal analysis, like
Me
form
neither.
structure.
I'm
But
feeling lucky.
it's easy at, with a lot of these
No,
pieces to
like
assume,
with,
yeah, where the exposition is, and
yeah,
usually it's standard forms,
yeah,
like sonata allegro form, and last one sometimes is a rondo, etc., theme and variations. It's pretty easy to pick up on these forms, but it's a good question though, because at this point, for me, it's a little bit sort of comes naturally to see the structure of a piece, but you do have to look for it a little bit. And especially for people where it doesn't come naturally, you really should know where you are in the piece, and if you're in the development, the exposition, which key centers you're in, and all that stuff. So that's the structure in music is incredibly important. So
yeah.
yes, I think it's not a bad idea actually to do a little bit of a structural analysis before you start learning a piece. Maybe I'll do that.
Ah, I gave you a recommendation. Hmm.
Yes, you
Well,
did.
I asked this just because people always ask me how do you analyze your pieces, and I kind of think that music is just so much more than just the sum of its parts. And when you go in and dive in, trying to dissect everything right away, then you just get all the little pieces. Of
Mm,
course, you get the form from that analysis, but I like to kind of do just the sight reading part and learning about what the music is going to be even before listening to recordings, ideally, unless it
yeah,
was
so you're not
I
influenced.
picked it from a recording. But
Yeah.
yeah, so kind of similar process.
But I'll tell you what, at a certain point, yeah, you don't have to do this right away, but at a certain point, depending on the composer, but it is great to know more specifically about, your, as I said, the key centers, and which cadence you have, and more specific analysis. I mean, for example, solo Bach, Bach used to sometimes sound to me often like very long sentences, because if the performance is not, or if the performer don't quite know where they are harmonically in Bach, then it can end up being very confusing. The sentence can be very long, you don't quite understand where one sentence ends, or where there's a comma and all this stuff. So you really do have to know harmonically where you are in the music of Bach, for example, and also like where the sequences happen, and same, for example, with the music of Beethoven. I've been playing a lot of Beethoven as of late, like a lot of people, and I think maybe even more so, maybe Beethoven is the greatest in terms of structure, and architecture. I like to talk about architecture in music, because if it's clear in your mind, then the music comes out even more clear to the audience.
Yeah, so that you can guide them through the process rather than being lost on your own. Yeah, that's true. But you never really do a whole full-on harmonic analysis on pieces, right?
No, no. I mean, I was pretty good at it. Growing up in France, there was solfège from a young age, and like I remember doing like a four-part. What do you call this? Like a string quartet would play for us. We had to take down all four parts, and all this stuff. So at a
Wow.
pretty young age, so yeah, I had a really excellent solfège teacher, so I was pretty good at it. I'm sure I've lost a lot of the basics, but I'm good enough to pick up sort of the foundations of it. But yeah, I don't sit down and do like a full harmonic analysis. As a matter of fact, recently, because I was on a oral exam for one of my doctorate students at Stony Brook, and one of the um, other teachers on the panel um, reminded me, anyways, that um, in Bach's time, there was no harmonic analysis.
That's what I
It,
thought.
it it only is. Sorry, this is New York City. We have the ambulance passing by,
Yeah.
but no, it only happened years after, I mean, decades after Bach, where things were starting to be analyzed. So uh,
Yeah, that
yeah,
was always that was exactly what made me not so enthusiastic after the first, like, at first when I learned harmonic analysis, I thought, "Wow, this is so cool. It's like a puzzle. It's like filling a Sudoku." But then, after that, it just got too analytical, and I had that thought that how did people interpret Bach's pieces back then without the system?
right. Yeah, that's a very good question. But yeah, same with form, by the way. Like, all the forms that composers use, they they were put into a box, into a structure, only because people, after Mozart and Haydn and whatnot, started noticing the similarities, right? That
Yeah,
oh, this is
exactly.
exposition and all that stuff. I don't necessarily, well, I don't know. I wasn't in their shoes, but I don't know exactly how Mozart or Haydn would have thought, if they would, have started from, okay, this is the structure I want to use, and or they just wrote, and so it sort of fell into that structure, and then
Yeah.
later on people sort of put them into these categories.
Yeah, that was, exactly how I thought, I like talking to you. I'm getting a lot of affirmations about some of the
Well, thank you. Same for me.
some
Same,
of the
same for
questions
me.
I've had. Interesting. Okay, I kind of interrupted you and went on a whole different tangent about so
No,
many.
me too. Me too. But okay, so I have one last
One
recording
last.
maybe that I want to mention.
Yeah.
And this is sort of a little gem that not too many people know about, that I found on YouTube, of a French violinist by the name of Maxime Tolons, who, I don't know if he still is or was the concertmaster. Now, I don't want to get this wrong. I think it's the Paris Opera, if I'm not mistaken. And I found on YouTube, it's a video, but it's like a blank screen, so you can only hear the music,
Mhm.
of him playing this most gorgeous little 5-minute piece by Tchaikovsky. Is the entr'acte from Sleeping Beauty. So it happens in between the acts, and so it's a 5-minute solo for solo violin and orchestra.
Mhm.
And first of all, the music itself is gorgeous. Tchaikovsky is another one of my all-time favorites. But the playing is stupendous, and he is not a well-known violinist internationally. But I've heard this recording so many times, and every time I hear it, I'm so moved by the performance, the um, um sheer beauty of the playing, the sound, the use of various fingerings and slides, and just the whole thing is so masterfully played. And so I thought I would share it with your audience, because, of course, I could talk about all my violin heroes. People know them already, like Heifetz and Perlman, and all the well-known names, and there are millions of recordings that I could mention here. But I thought I'd mention one off the beaten path that people probably haven't heard, and I think will really enjoy listening to it. So I'll send you the link. You can link
Yeah,
it for them. Yeah,
I'm definitely very intrigued. Thank you. You put a lot of thought into, thinking what the audience would enjoy, so I appreciate that.
my pleasure. And by the way, I share this recording always with students, in our studio classes, or if I do like a Zoom thing or something. That's one of the recordings I always share, because
Mm.
it's so beautiful.
Well, I will definitely listen. I'm curious what it is about
Yeah, you'll have to send me a text or something. Let me know what you thought of it.
yeah, wait. I don't even have your number actually.
Well, I'll give it to you, but not here.
Thank you. Um, this was good. Very enjoyable. I had one last question, but it's not really that interesting. Maybe it's just a side note thing. But when you were talking about Rachmaninoff, also by the way, I didn't know you were such a Russian composer enthusiast.
That's true. I've mentioned a lot of Russian composers. Well, I had a Russian teacher,
You
but that's
recorded Brahms, didn't you? The
I
album.
recorded. Yeah, the Brahms sonatas. I guess Brahms wasn't Russian, but
Yeah, so I
uh,
was surprised that you mentioned a few Russian composers since you played Brahms for
I
your.
love so many composers. I love Mendelssohn. I love a lot of Czech music. I mean, because I'm sure you get these questions always in interviews. Who is your favorite composer?
I've
You
now
can
just settled
never.
on. It's like the easy. Now I
Yeah.
have
Oh,
to
really?
answer.
Yes.
Just because I can't just go on and say I don't know. I don't have one.
Yeah, well, I usually it's like picking, it's like picking your favorite child if you have multiple kids. But I often talk about Czech music. I don't know what it is about Czech music, like Janacek, Dvorak, Suk,
Huh?
all these composers. I find I have a very close connection with that music. It speaks to me. It feels very raw and sort of goes straight to my heart. So
You didn't choose one of the Czech composer's pieces for.
that's true. I don't know. I mean, there's so many pieces that I could have mentioned. So I don't know. Those the ones I mentioned were just the ones that first came to mind.
That's also completely fine and great. No, but the question I had was, when you were mentioning the Rachmaninoff symphonies, you never wanted to be in an orchestra, or you just went
Hmm.
for the solo slash chamber music? I mean, I think you're very much in this chamber music, right?
Yeah.
Did you
Um,
choose that, or?
well, luckily, I was accepted into the Chamber Music Society 2 program, which now is known as the Bowers program, when I was still at Juilliard.
Mm,
And so that was a wonderful way to transition from student to
yeah.
performing.
Mhm.
And so that's really what set my path into the chamber music world. And yeah, luckily, right after that, I just started getting a lot of invitations and was able to fill my calendar with chamber music. And I was doing a lot of solo back then as well. So I never, felt like, oh, I don't, I need to prepare for an orchestra audition or something.
Mm,
And so over the years, I have been invited for, like, specifically for concertmaster auditions, for example, but I have not felt the strong desire to do that, although they have incredible repertoire. I would love to play some of that, like the Beethoven symphonies, or like all symphonies. But I enjoy the individuality of what I do in chamber music. One per part, and being able to have my voice heard instead of being part of a section, and being the master of my own musical decisions to a certain extent, because of course in chamber music it's sort of a collaboration. So you're not dictating only, you're just deciding with your colleagues.
mhm.
But so for all these reasons, I have not felt any desire to play in an orchestra. Maybe one day, because of course I think it's a more stable lifestyle, right? You live in a city, and you don't have to travel quite as much and all that. But probably not, because I'm very happy with what I do. So if
Yeah, I
things keep
agree.
going this way, I can't see myself really wanting to play an orchestra. I can see myself teaching more, but going into the orchestra route, I don't think so.
Mm.
But who knows? You never know.
Yeah. No, but you seem very happy with just from talking about your experiences in chamber music, and so far it
Yeah,
doesn't seem
well,
like you're like, I wish I had taken a job in the orchestra.
no, not at all. And it's not just what I do. Luckily, and I think people nowadays have very multifaceted careers in the music world. I think back in the day, you were a soloist, or you were a chamber musician, or an orchestra player. But nowadays, it seems like people do a little bit of everything. So
Mm.
I play a lot of chamber music concerts. That's the main thing I do. But I run a chamber music organization in Florida. I'm the artistic director. It's called Chamber Music Society of Palm Beach, and so that's a
Oh,
wonderful.
that's why. Sorry, I should have looked this up, and I feel very embarrassed. But that's I mentioned to you that there was someone who watched came to one of.
Yes, you
Ah,
yeah,
so
you
you were
send that in
director
the
of
email.
that. I knew you were a director of a series, but I didn't know it was that one.
In Florida, exactly. So we have
Ah.
7 concerts a year that I program, and I'm quite involved with the organization. And that's the most recent of my jobs.
Mm.
And it's a new thing for me to be a
Yeah.
presenter,
What's that
which
like?
is, well, that's amazing. I mean,
You wear three hats now. You're a performing musician, and then you're a teacher, and now also.
exactly. So yeah, the present to be presenting now, like to be on this side of the music business, is great. It's opening my eyes to so many new things, and it's exciting because not that I was blasé about performing in chamber music. I love it. I still love doing it, but I love having this new facet in my life, and having to think about uh, everything about presenting a concert, and running a series, and inviting the musicians, and working on the budget. Although we have other people on the team helping, but to think about how to program music to appeal to the audience. And right now we're working on redesigning the website, and how to use our social media channels. Maybe I should ask you a couple of questions about how we can do better with that. But yeah, so
Yeah.
this has been a nice addition in my life, just thinking about
Mm.
different things in
Now I
my world.
understand why you've been very generous and thinking like, oh, what would the audience like to know? And so that perhaps comes from also having the presenter hat.
Oh, possibly, but I know you have such a great following. I'm a YouTube junkie. I spend so much time
Really?
on. Yes,
Oh,
I love YouTube.
cool.
So I sort of I don't really post all that much. I do have a channel, by the way, but and also just this last year with our baby, I haven't had a chance to really post anything on my Instagram, which I used to post a lot on and all this stuff. But so I know the social media world. I know it up to like Instagram. I don't do TikTok or
Me
anything. Do you
neither.
do TikTok? You're not on TikTok?
Mm-mm.
Yeah. See, my wife is trying to get me to post on TikTok, but I've not made that plunge yet. I don't post anymore on my other channels. I really should start doing that again. But
But
yeah.
I knew actually from seeing the Chamber Society video that you did for them. They did some like artist profiles, I think.
Oh yes, that was last year during the pandemic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I knew that you were comfortable on camera. Thank you so much, Arnold.
Thank you, everybody.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I had a lot of fun talking to Arnold. I was not expecting him to have so many stories and interesting insights, so I'm very glad to have had this chat. I'm always really grateful when classical musicians with a professional career and with so much experience are willing to come on to share their story with me and with all of you on Classical Chats. So thank you for supporting Together with Classical. Be sure to check out our current fundraising for any updates, and also check out our other episodes of Classical Chats for more inspirations. In